Good evening. Try that again. Good evening. And welcome to St. Mark's Cathedral. It's my great pleasure and privilege to serve as the dean of this cathedral, and for nearly 90 years now, this space has been used as a house of prayer for all people, but it also serves uniquely as a community resource and venue for events such as this one this evening, when the broader community gathers in mutual concern to address matters of justice and the ways we are called to respond to injustices in the world. This cathedral exists for times such as this, for events such as this, as a beacon of hope on the hill, and we are glad that you are here. To introduce our keynote speaker, I'd like to call on the vice chair of our cathedral board, known as the vestry, Senior Warden Lynn Markova, who was instrumental in envisioning this event. And again, let me say welcome. Lynn?
Thank you, Steve. As Steve said, I'm Lynn Markova, and I am the Vice President of the Board, aka the Senior Warden of St. Mark's Cathedral, and it's wonderful to see all of you here. Here's how this evening will proceed. The Attorney General will speak first, followed by some conversation with and remarks from our Bishop, the Right Reverend Greg Rickel. Bishop Rickel will then moderate a panel of distinguished community leaders on this issue, including Marcos Martinez, Executive Director of Casa Latina, Estela Ortega, Executive Director of El Centro de la Raza, and Michael Ramos, Executive Director of the Church Council of Greater Seattle. This event originated more than a year ago when I attended an event at which the Attorney General was present. I approached him to thank him for his work with immigrants and refugees, and his commitment to upholding the rule of law, issues dear to my heart, as I have had refugees in my own family history. During our conversation, I mentioned my connection to St. Mark's Cathedral and that we have a long history of supporting immigrant and refugee rights, which continues in our sanctuary work today, and asked if he would consider speaking here. Imagine my surprise and delight when he immediately said he would. A fourth-generation Washingtonian, Bob Ferguson attended Bishop Blanchette High School and the University of Washington before leaving Washington to attend New York University Law School. Prior to becoming Attorney General, he served on the King County Council. Bob and his wife Colleen are the proud parents of 10-year-old twins, Jack and Katie. He is an enthusiastic mountain climber, not internationally, backpacker and birder, here's where the internationally part comes in, and is an internationally ranked chess master. Please join me in welcoming Washington State's 18th Attorney General, Bob Ferguson.
There we go. Thank you so much for that kind introduction, all the wonderful work you and everybody else here at St. Mark's does. I so greatly appreciate it. And I should mention, my chess background. It's true, I used to play a lot of chess when I was younger. And so all through I started when I was a young boy and played very seriously all through my teenage years. And after I finished high school at Blanchette, instead of going to college, I decided I wanted to become a professional chess player, which is not the usual route to becoming Attorney General, but it worked for me. And so I remember clearly sitting down with my mother and father. My mom's still very much alive. She's now 90. My father's passed away. And telling them that I was not going to go to college and instead was going to try to go to Europe and become a professional chess player. They were less enthusiastic about the idea than I'd hoped. So, but they were smart. I'm one of 7 kids, and my parents were great parents in many ways, but one great thing they understood as parents is you cannot tell an 18-year-old child what to do, right? If they've got their mind set on something, be supportive, which they were. They helped me out with my goals, and when I realized I was not going to become a world chess champion. I came to my senses, enrolled in school, and here I am today. So thanks for having me. You mentioned the long history St. Mark's has on social justice issues and other issues. And I recall reading an article, I think it was, somebody might correct me, but I think it was last year in late January, early February, that Joel Conley wrote about St. Mark's and the just incredible work that St. Mark's has done over many decades, over many issues, confronting our society, and the leadership that this community has shown over and over again in welcoming people from different backgrounds. And so having this event here today and the great panel, I'm really the warm-up act for the panel, so that's my job here is to, but I think that this event is, of course, in that same spirit, which I really appreciate. Yeah, I've been asked to speak a bit about the work in the office that we have, in particular related to immigration-related issues, of which there's a lot. So I'm going to give you a highly abridged version. And what I'm going to do is focus on 3 cases that we have. I won't speak too much about the legal side of those. What I will focus on is what I think are important values that we as a society, I think, share, that I think are reflected in those cases, and that I think are what's motivating me, as well as my team, which works very hard in these cases to bring these cases. These are 3 cases against the Trump administration. They are 3 of 32 lawsuits we filed against the administration. So there's been a lot of litigation against the Trump administration. You know, I will point out that that's a lot of lawsuits against any president. That's a lot of litigation. Those lawsuits are brought, not by me as an individual. I bring them on behalf of the people of the state of Washington, which means essentially all of you are bringing those lawsuits. That's how it works. I do that on behalf of the people of the state. So I'm mindful if I'm suing the president that a lot of people in the state might support that. A lot of people in the state might really, really oppose it and have very strong views about that. So I was chatting with someone beforehand, and what I just want to emphasize, what I'm going to share with you is what I share with groups all around the state, regardless of their political views or what they may think of me or these cases. I have a goal to speak to every Rotary Club in the state. There's 180 of them. I've been to about 135. They're in blue parts of the state. They are in deep, deep red parts of the state. What I'm telling you is exactly what I tell them. I feel confident in why we're bringing these cases, but I do think there are shared values there. And look, it is also worth knowing that in those 32 cases, we've had decisions in 14 of them. Washington State has won all 14 of those cases. We've won 14 and lost none so far. So to me, one reason I became a lawyer is because the law is such a powerful tool. It's such a powerful tool to hold everybody accountable to the rule of law. You're accountable to it. I'm accountable to it. The president is accountable to it as well. And that's why, for me, I gave a lot of thought to being a public defender or to work in emergency services. But for me, the path of using the law in an affirmative way really spoke to me. And so the first case I'll mention, and I'll be brief on all these and happy to, in the conversation, chat about it in more detail. But the first case, of course, was the first travel ban, the first Muslim travel ban signed by the president shortly after he took office, January of last year. And a lot's been written about it, but sometimes people forget just how broad that travel ban was. Because there were 3 versions of the travel ban, right? We had the first one defeated, then there was a second more narrow one, then a third more narrow one still before the Supreme Court finally approved it. We were not involved in that last litigation. That was the state of Hawaii. But that first one, for example, applied to anybody in our country who had a green card. It applied to anyone who's here legally with a green card, working in businesses, going to our schools. So there were literally Washingtonians who had a green card who were traveling abroad when the travel ban was signed who could not come back into the United States. Students at our colleges and universities could not come back. They were part of our lawsuit, their declarations. There were people here in our state, quite legally, living their lives who could not attend the funeral of a family member if they happened to be in one of those 7 Muslim majority countries or travel abroad. So the impacts were vast in so many respects. And I'm proud that Washington State was the first state to challenge that travel ban. Thanks. And part of, I'm sometimes asked why we filed it. Well, that's a complicated question in many respects. But what I would say is that obviously we had to feel that we had a good case from a legal perspective, which most people did not think we had. When we filed it, no other state joined us the day we filed. Some came on board later on, but not when we first filed it. So we felt we had good arguments, but I have to be honest with you that I really just felt that weekend, we were working all through the weekend on it, and I just was so angry about the travel ban. I mean, truly, on a personal level, it made me mad. I mean, the words I have are not appropriate for this setting, right? I mean, true, right? I mean, but I was that level of angry about it, and I think that's what, I think it's okay as a lawyer to have those emotions play a role in one's decision-making. You can't be ruled by those emotions. You gotta be essentially ruled by the rule of law, but I think it's okay to communicate to your team, hey, this is wrong. And also what I asked the team to do was, we're gonna file it on Monday. So the travel ban's signed on a Friday night. Take my word for it, it's complicated to put together a complaint of that magnitude in a weekend. I just try to take my word for that. But I said, hey, do we think we can file it Monday? And the team said they think they could. And the reason why I wanted to file it Monday was because I literally did not want one business day. I didn't want one business day where the president thought that the people of our state were okay with what he did. Not one day, right? Not one day. So, and one more thing I'll add about each of these cases goes to fundamental issues of who we are as a people. I'll give you an example. There are many with the travel ban. I'll give you one that did not get as much attention in the press. The Department of Justice, your Department of Justice, right, the Federal Department of Justice, in defending the travel ban, they did not simply argue that the president has a lot of authority to issue an executive order on immigration, which he does. He's the president, he got elected. There's consequences to that. What they actually argued in their briefs before federal judges at the trial court and the Court of Appeals, what they actually wrote in their briefs and articulated oral argument is that, I'm quoting now, the president's authority to issue the executive order is unreviewable by the courts. That the courts can't even look behind the thinking, the rationale, whether there's a racial animus in the decision to issue that executive order. Look, that's never been the law in our country. In times of war, courts have looked at presidential actions. It's not the law now. And from my standpoint, we're not going to allow that to be the law. And it was important we won for a lot of reasons, but one was because the courts rejected that, and the administration's never made that argument again. In all these other cases, they've never said, hey, courts, you can't look at it. That's pretty fundamental to who we are as a people, right? We're a democracy. My kids are only 10, but they understand separate branches of government already. And reinforcing that in that decision was an important one. The second case I'll mention, the family separation case. And so, so as I think many of you know, I think it was April 6th of 2018 that Attorney General Sessions announced the zero tolerance program policy for the southern border. When it became clear in the public that families were being separated, my team went to work to see if there was a legal argument that we could put together and file a lawsuit. In June, we learned that ICE had sent 174 women to Washington State to a federal detention facility here in Washington. So these were women who'd crossed the border with the child, had been separated from the child, and the women had been sent to Washington, their children sent somewhere else. So there are 174 of the many stories you heard about. So in preparing for a lawsuit, one thing we did was we interviewed many of those women who were in Washington State to find out what had happened, and to ask them if they would file a declaration with the federal court, signing their name to it, explaining what happened to them, which is an act of great courage. Look, it's easy for me, right, to do what I do, right? A woman from a country far away who's been separated from a child, who is afraid, right, does not speak English, to sign that and have that filed with the federal court, that takes some guts. So through that process, at one point I said, hey, and so Washington State was planning to lead a coalition of states. We're going to file a lawsuit here in Washington, hoping other states would join us. So I asked my team, I said, hey, I want to go down and interview some of these women as well. So I went down to the detention facility down in Tacoma, at that time is where they were. I went with a woman named Alma, who's an investigator in my office. She speaks Spanish, I do not. And so interviewed 5 of these women. And I remember the conversations very clearly. There were a lot of, and we were asking them to explain what had happened, how they were separated from their child, etc. So there was a lot of emotion in those conversations, to put it very mildly. A lot of tears in those conversations, except for one woman who was pretty composed as she told her story, relatively speaking. I mean, obviously she was emotional, but she was telling what happened. And so she'd been separated from her son, who was like 4 or 5 years old. She did not have a chance to say goodbye to her son. She had gone to a hearing about her immigration status. When she came back, her son was gone, and she hadn't seen him since. And that had been many, many weeks before. She'd finally just spoken to him a week before I had my conversation with her, or 5 days before, something like that. And that was not unusual, that these women did not have a chance to say goodbye to their children, that they were separated without having a chance to say goodbye. So I asked her a question I asked all the women. I said, well, you've talked to your son now, how's he doing? And when I asked that question, she became very emotional and had a hard time speaking. And the reason is because she said that when she finally was able to call her son, he would not speak to her. And the reason he would not speak to her is because he's convinced that she brought him to the United States to give him away. And she's had a second conversation, the same thing had happened, which, if you think about it, makes a certain amount of sense that a 5-year-old child would think that. You have a home in whatever country it is. You do not realize when you're 5 years old, your home may have some security problems for whatever reason. You're too young to understand that. All you know is it's your home and you like it. You're 5. Your mother takes you on this, God knows what kind of a journey it was. You come to this strange land, and then your mother goes away and never comes back. She doesn't call, she doesn't visit, nothing. You're taken to another strange place. What else would you think if you're 5 years old except, well, my mom brought me here to give me away? It's actually the only logical thing for a 5-year-old brain, I think. So, when I speak about that case, where's the decency, right? Just fundamental decency. And I am convinced that our country, sometime in the future, will look back on this shameful episode of separating families at the border in exactly the same way we look back at the internment of Japanese Americans. I really believe that. I've took my kids on our spring break. We were down in camping down south, and we took them to a Japanese internment camp in California, and from the view of a 10-year-old, we put people here behind barbed wire who are Americans? Like, this is crazy to them, of course, right? This is crazy. Well, I think that's how the future will judge us as a people as well, for doing this. So when I think about the family separation case, I think about her. I think about all those women who signed those declarations, right? Who had the guts to do that. And that was really the first time those stories were made public. There'd been a lot of media coverage, but no one had actually, you can't interview those women on TV, right? That was the first time their stories had been brought to life, and I think was so important. The third case I'll mention briefly is the case around, and by the way, that litigation is ongoing. Many families have been reunited, not all. There's a complicated procedural aspect on that, and that is still ongoing. The third case is the case around Dreamers, the DACA program put into place by President Obama several years ago. This is a program that allows protections for individuals to stay in our country who came to this country as children. They were brought here at a young age through no fault of their own. Their parents crossed the border illegally. The kids were with them. So Dreamers, there's about 800,000 Dreamers in our country. In Washington State, we have about 18 or 19,000 Dreamers. They're going to our colleges. They're working on our businesses. They're in our church pews with us, right? And there's a whole process to become a Dreamer. I think it was just after Labor Day last year, the President and the Attorney General announced they were removing those protections for those Dreamers, eliminating that law, that DACA law, effective, and they put a deadline, I think, of March 1st of this year on it, that if Congress didn't act, they would eliminate the DACA program. So we filed a lawsuit, co-leading it with Massachusetts and New York, filed a lawsuit. A federal judge granted us an injunction blocking the President from eliminating the DACA program. So the March 1st deadline has come and gone, but if that decision changes when it's appealed up the courts, which these things happen, it can happen, those Dreamers would be eligible for deportation. No act of Congress has protected them. So what I want to say about the Dreamers case is that, in order to become a Dreamer, you've got to go through a lengthy process, fill out a lot of forms. In fact, a dreamer was just texting me just before I sat down. She got her status renewed for several more years because of our litigation, so she was letting me know. And, but you have to go through a lengthy process. And you have to come out of the shadows. It's the first step. You've got to communicate to the very entity that has the power to deport you who you are, where you live, where you go to school, who your family members are. They may or may not be documented. You get the idea. You've got to hand that on over to the federal government. So in order to encourage potential dreamers to do that, the federal government several years ago said, we promise if you do that, we will never use the information you are voluntarily providing to us, the federal government. We'll never use that to deport you. And every dreamer I've spoken to, the idea of being deported back to whatever country they're from is like, I don't know anybody there. I may not speak the language. This is my home. Trust me, they are every bit as American as Jack and Katie, my kids. Take my word for it, right? So the federal government actually had a Q&A on a federal government website about the Dreamers program. When the questions, will this information I, potential dreamer, am giving you, federal government, will it ever be used against me to deport me? Answer on the website, no. Pretty straightforward. You can't really expect people to do that unless you assure them you won't turn around and deport them based on the information they provided you. On the day that the Attorney General and the President announced they were taking away the DACA program, that question and that answer on that website, they were removed, taken down. Look, I get that in our country, there are strong views in immigration. I get that. Dreamers notwithstanding, there's strong support for dreamers in general, if you check out polling. But wherever one is on the issue of immigration, does anyone really think that that is okay? It's outrageous. It's outrageous. And the way I communicate it is, there are few American values more fundamental than a deal is a deal, right? In fact, we teach our children that value, I think, as a parent, pretty much as soon as we think they can comprehend the concept, we communicate to them. A deal is a deal, right? My son Jack, he's 10. He's into Pokemon cards. It's some kind of a, I don't know what it is. It's some kind of a card thing. I don't know what it is. I collected baseball cards. He's got Pokemon cards. But they're different cards. They have different value. They do something. And he sometimes trades them with his friends. That's what I know about Pokemon cards. So Jack will sometimes trade his cards with his best friend, Elliot. If Jack comes home from trading his Pokemon cards with Elliot one day and says to me, hey, Dad, I realized I made a bad trade with Elliot. I traded a valuable Pokemon card for one that's not so valuable. We need to go up to his house and get my card back. Right? If he says that to me, what am I going to say? No, son, that's not how it works. That's not how it works. You made a deal. You may not like the deal now. I get that. You may not like it, but you made a deal. You've got to honor that deal. That's how it works. Well, with dreamers, we're not talking about Pokemon cards. Right? In fact, there's Pokemon cards, and then there's dreamers. You can't be any more opposite. But the principle is exactly the same. We made a promise on one of the most fundamental things there is for a human being, where you're going to live, for goodness sake, right? Who you can be with, whether you're going to be with your family or not, or be the church you know or not, or the job or the school, or all of the above. And yet the President and the Attorney General, not once have they said they won't keep that promise. Not once. So, each of these cases, and those are just 3 of them, I think reflect back on who we are, right? I really believe that. I tell my team all the time, look, behind every case, you can't think of the law as just the Constitution and just these federal statutes. Those are very, very important, and we need to communicate that. But in all of our cases, we are filing declarations of dreamers. We are filing declarations of women separated by their children, right? We are filing, in the travel ban, declarations from individuals impacted by that travel ban. I want the courts, who are people, judges, and the public to know the people behind these policies and how they're being impacted. That's important, right? Every case, you have to tell a story. You got to tell a story. That's how it works. We're wired that way. And in fact, I was really reminded of this, and this is my last thought before I'll wrap up, is I was reminded when that first travel ban case was going on, after we won, a federal judge here in Seattle granted our injunction that first week, striking it down nationwide, which was obviously a big moment. And a few days later, my executive assistant, her name's Judy, she came to my office. She said, Bob, you've got some letters about the travel ban. And so not emails, but handwritten letters. And so she had a small box of them, and I started reading them, and they were from all around the country and the state, of course. But they were very different letters. That they were very emotional letters. People wrote things like, "Hey, I was born in a Japanese American internment camp. Here's what there was an executive order back then that impacted my family's life. Here's what this executive order means to me and my family." Or my family's from Germany. In the 1930s, we tried to flee Nazi Germany. Either we were successful or we were unsuccessful, or sometimes a little bit of both, right? Here's what immigration policy means to me, and whether a country would welcome someone into their country or not. And so I thought, in reading these letters, I thought, well, hey, if somebody writes a letter like that to me, I'll handwrite a quick note back. And I figured there'd be like 100 of them when they're all counted up, and it wouldn't be that big of a deal. Well, there ended up being a lot more than 100. And so I thought, well, if someone writes from my state, I'm going to write back. I'll narrow it down. But still, there were thousands of them. There's a lot. So, but as my friends know, if I set a goal, I like to achieve it. I've got a friend in the audience here somewhere who I go mountain climbing with every year, and so he knows if we're going mountain climbing, we'll be responsible, but we're getting to the top, right? And so it became a big job, and I began bringing the letters home with me. My team would organize all the letters, and I'd bring them home. And up until this point with my children, who were then just 8, I think, I hadn't really said much about the travel ban. I think I just figured they were pretty young. How to explain it, right? And so I hadn't really said much to them other than they knew I was gone from work a lot, and they asked me why I was gone so much. And I just said the first thing that popped in my head. I said, well, Jack and Katie, the president did a bad thing and Dad's trying to stop him. Which it's true. I really wasn't trying to be funny. It strikes me as funny now. But what I like about it is that what's a great thing about our country, my kids thought that was the most normal thing in the world. Truly, some kid's dad that's what he's doing down there at the office, right? Which is really a great thing about our country, right? We shouldn't take it for granted. As crazy as things are with the administration, we should not take that for granted. And so I'm home and I'm doing these letters, and my daughter Katie's next to me doing her homework at the dining room table, and I had started getting letters from children whose parents from the 7 countries had obviously asked their children to write me letters, right? And so letters from kids are often great, and you can tell it's in a scrawl and there's a picture. And so she looked over and she said, "Daddy, what's that?" And it was one of these letters, and this young girl, who turned out to be exactly Katie's age, 8 years old, from Iraq, and she'd drawn a picture of me and herself, the little girl in the picture, and so that got Katie's attention. So she says, "Daddy, what is that?" And I said, "Well, it's a letter I received from an 8-year-old girl." And so of course, Katie says, "Well, why is she writing to you?" So I said, well, so I started trying to explain the travel ban, which I wasn't doing a very good job. So I finally just read the girl's letter, right? Which was a really beautiful letter, and sort of capturing what was going on in her life and her family's life. And she wrote the nicest thing. She wrote, is the best thing you've ever got. She wrote part of the letter. She wrote, "Because you stood up, I can be here," right? Which is the nicest thing anybody could write. And so Katie says, "Well, why are you writing back to her?" And I said, "Well, it's polite, right? If grandmother gives you a birthday present, you write her a note back. It's the polite thing to do, so I'm writing her a letter back." And Katie said, "Well, hey, can I write her a note too?" So I said, "Sure." And so Katie wrote her own note at the end. And then Katie said, "Well, can I write a note to all the letters you get from kids?" Of which there were a lot. So it became this wonderful ritual we had every night. My team would separate the letters from kids, and we would sit down together, and Katie would draw a picture of a butterfly or a horse and write her own note to these kids. And it was a reminder of a lot of things. One is that the power of communicating in whatever language one has, in whatever voice one has, whatever age one has, you can still reach people in a powerful way, right? I'll never forget that letter. As long as I live, right? I'll never forget it. I don't think Katie will either. And not that long ago, Katie and that girl had a play date. We had them over to the house, and you know, they hung out. I'm not suggesting we can solve all the world's problems with play dates, but you know, it's not the worst place to start, right? It's really not the worst place to start. So thanks so much for having me tonight, and look forward to the questions.
You want to stand up? Yeah, definitely. Stand. Well, I want to say, about 2 weeks ago, we were at an event where Luke 5 was the gospel. In Luke 5, after some pretty stunning things have happened with Jesus and the disciples, the line is, "Some very strange things have happened today." And I remarked to the crowd, I get up every day and say those words, "Some very strange things have happened today." I want to say how thankful I am in these last days for the rule of law, for our courts, and for people like this man standing right here. I didn't go to seminary to sue the president either. I had to tell people that on various occasions, that I didn't go to seminary or become a bishop in order to sue the president. However, that presented itself, and for different reasons, I had the same choice to make. In a group of people, our diocese is just like the state. There are people red and blue and across the board. And really the rule of law, while I'm thankful for it, is not my primary allegiance. My primary allegiance is our faith and the gospel. And in this way, these two things, I think, have come together. So it's my job to ask a few questions, and I just relish this opportunity. The first one maybe is a softball question. How does being a chess expert play into your job every day?
More than you might think.
Yeah, I think it would be true.
Let's put it this way. Outside of being part of a big Catholic family, which is hugely influential, as you might imagine, growing up with 6 siblings, and that's a family unit's very influential. Outside of the family unit, if I had to pick the most influential part of my life that influences the way I think about the world, it'd be all that time playing chess. So I'm forever telling chess analogies to my team at the AG's office. I'm sure they roll their eyes every time I do it, but chess teaches a lot. And just one thing I will say is, you do need to think ahead in chess. It's a cliche, but you are constantly thinking about what your opponent's going to do. If you are not objective about that, you've got a problem. You need to predict the next move. The success of your game depends on that. So I do think the travel ban being an example, during the campaign, the president said he was going to, if he became president, would enact a total and complete shutdown of Muslims coming into the United States. After he got elected, we thought about what did he say in the campaign trail that he might actually do. We looked at that and started preparing for some executive order along those lines, which I think actually really helped. Absolutely, yeah. Which really helped us. Yeah. So it actually really influences me a lot.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So maybe less of a softball. When I'm really want to. Many people come to me and say we shouldn't have politics in the church. Typically, I respond, the church invented politics. So all hope is lost on that. But and then, of course, somewhere down the line, separation of church and state comes up. And the way I've always responded to that is, my belief is that Founding Fathers' premise in that was that they would never become the other, but they certainly and should always speak to one another. Do you think that that's a good description?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the way I look at it is, what I said earlier is, what I just communicate to all of you, I communicate to people all around the state, whatever their political orientation is. I mean, to me, it's less politics, right? There are political actors involved, right? But it's not politics. Is it legal? Sure. But I don't think this is central to who we are, the lives that we lead. All those things go through the courts and are central to who we are. So I think not only is it difficult to separate those two, I think if one wants to, certainly for my faith and being part of a big Catholic family and the influence of the Jesuit community on me, is that intersection of you are part of the world, not separate from it, you are part of it, is central to to that thinking, and my late uncle was a Jesuit priest, and that's certainly influenced me, and I think that is important.
Yeah. The thing that has come to me in this discussion, because I've received many letters also, interesting letters about this, but yes, is the misunderstanding of legal and illegal immigration. For instance, in the whole refugee situation, that's legal. Those people are legally here. You touched on that in the beginning of your discussion. And yet so many people that argue with you or me on this really don't seem to understand that.
Well, immigration issues are, in some ways, I'm not sure if this directly answers your question, but in some ways, of all the litigation we have against the president, a number of the cases are immigration related. Most are not, but many of the high profile ones are. If I'm speaking to an audience that is more conservative, interestingly, on issues related to immigration, their views are often closer to mine than one might think. They see who the workforce actually is in the businesses in central and eastern Washington. They understand, as business owners or folks who support those businesses, hey, who's picking the fruit if not the folks who are picking it? And they know who that is, right? So their views are more nuanced on those issues maybe than others, and those distinctions maybe fall away a little bit. I guess for me, part of what I try to communicate is, yes, there's a big debate in Congress and what should our immigration laws be. For me, it's a couple things. One, whatever those laws are, and we currently have some, the president needs to follow them. That's how it works. We've got laws, he's got to follow them, right? So that's number one. And number two is, I think that in enacting those laws, or if the president wants to change those, I think we can do that in a way that is decent to people, right? I mean, decent. And to me, man, I just, my late father was very much a guy who, he did not care for people who were not decent to others, right? He was a kind man, a nice man, but man, you knew it if he did not think somebody was decent as a human being. And that's the word he would use a lot. He would use that a lot. And it really impacted me. I remember as a kid, now I'm way off your question, but I remember as a kid, it just sort of struck me as I remember, I'm not drawing analogies to this current time to that time, although maybe others will, but this is the story he would often tell me. I remember it clearly is during the McCarthy hearings. At some point during the McCarthy hearings, which my father, of course, very much lived for, my father, by the way, was a lifelong Republican, diehard Republican, wondered where he went wrong with his son, by the way, just want to be clear. Diehard Republican, active in politics, right? Active in church, active in politics, Republican, but he often talked about during the McCarthy hearings, at some point during those hearings, somebody was being interrogated at a Senate hearing by Joseph McCarthy, and either the individual or their lawyer said to McCarthy, "Have you no decency, sir? Have you no decency?" And to my father, like that was really, the moment for him that where he realized, okay, something is wrong here with our country with these hearings. That guy was right to sort of call out McCarthy on something fundamental, decency. Right? And so I think, yes, hold them accountable to the rule of law, but family separation.
It'd be nice to have someone asking
decency,
that question.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm going to ask the panelists later this question, but I want to give it to you before you have to go. What do you want people to leave here with tonight, and what should we be doing to help you as you go about the work you're doing?
Sure.
Citizens.
Yeah. How folks should be feeling, what they should be doing. I guess, look, I'm an optimist by nature. I'll just concede that right up front. I'm an optimist. And so do I think this is a dark time in our country's history? You bet. Right? And so how I feel is complicated, right? I mean, obviously what's going on in many ways is, so discouraging, but I thank God every day I'm the Attorney General, and I have certain tools I can use to make things right as I see them. But I don't think you have to be Attorney General to do that. Your role, you have that role. Everybody here has that role. Everybody has a role. So I often will say to people is whatever your station in life, right, you can help. You can protest. You can support a good organization by volunteering your time. You can write a check to a good organization. You can get politically active. You can, right? Everybody has a role everybody has a role they can play. That 8-year-old girl from Iraq, right? I've told her story. God knows how many thousands of people have heard that letter. I mean, really, thousands and thousands, all around the country. I spoke at Oxford. I told her, I mean, I tell it all over the place. All over the place. Law schools all around the country. Because there's a real power in that voice from that girl. So I would encourage people to just, just to stay with it.
Yeah.
It's take the long run. And I do think our institutions, the rule of law, the free press, our institutions that we have as a country, I think are stronger than any one individual. As challenging as that individual may be, I do think our institutions are stronger.
Last question.
Yeah.
With that chess strategy,
Yeah.
what are the things on the horizon that we should be watching for and concerned about? What are you planning for, I guess?
Well, I can't give it all away. I
I
want to be invited back.
I've got to try. I've got to try.
I got to have something, right? So what I can say is this, the first thing I think about when I wake up in the morning and the last thing I think about when I go to bed at night is what I can do to make sure that the administration is following the rule of law. I think about it all the time. And a lot of folks on my team think about it a lot as well. And so, just so folks know, I mean, it is never far from my mind what is going on. I can assure you that. I got a lot on my plate, but it is never far from my mind. And I think what I just would also just share is that, a lot of people say, hey, thanks, Bob, for the work you're doing. I appreciate that. I really do. But, I also want to emphasize the team in my office, they work extraordinary, long hours, truly long hours, case after case. And the last thing I'll mention is we had, a few weeks ago, I walked in the office and the team was waiting for me, so I knew they had news. And they said, have you seen the paper? I said, well, no, I just got here. He said, we just won some big case that we have against administration. And so we're kind of celebrating. I'm not exaggerating. Like 17 minutes later, something was announced via tweet, right, that we were going to have to respond to. So we literally were laughing. We had like 17 minutes to enjoy the one victory before it was like, well, let's get back to work. And so that is our approach. We don't spend a whole lot of time dwelling on the wins we have, but we're very focused on what's going on. There's a lot of really dedicated folks who can make a lot more money at a private law firm, right, who are working on your behalf. And so if you see someone from the AG's office, say thanks to them as well. Yeah.
I want to thank you
Thank you
for all you do. I personally am very thankful for you. I know these people are as well. And I want to say that really many of the things you talked about tonight were compelling. But I think the play date was the most compelling. And I mean that in all seriousness. It means that you take this not just as a job, but to your heart. And it's good to know. Ladies and gentlemen, your Attorney General. Thank you. Bless you. He is running away because he's got to go straight to the airport, and yet he still was willing to come here. So let's thank him again and bid him safe travels as well. I think you all are going to use that. So. Oh, you got mics. So it's my great honor to have our panelists. I wondered if somebody could come and get the out of the way. I think it might be good. Thank you. And I want to introduce them, and then we'll have a conversation. I'll prompt them by saying I'd love for them each to say a little bit about their organization, and then also perhaps respond to what the Attorney General was speaking to, whatever touched you the most, whatever you think is important to highlight. First of all, to my far right is Estela Ortega from El Centro de la Raza. She is the executive director and began her career of community organizing, participating in voter registration and anti-war initiatives in her hometown of Houston, Texas. I've been there. She came to Seattle to join a peaceful occupation of an abandoned school that would later become El Centro de la Raza, the center for people of all races. Under Estela and her husband's leadership, El Centro became a cultural hub for community members to congregate, seek guidance and assistance, and to find a second family. And Estela continues as a force in coalition building, political advocacy, and strategic development. Let's welcome Estela Ortega. Next to her is Marcos Martinez with Casa Latina. He is the executive director of Casa Latina, spent 20 years at Albuquerque's NPR radio affiliate, focusing on social justice for Latinos and other immigrant, low-income, and disenfranchised communities. Before joining Casa Latina in 2016, he served as executive director of Entre Hermanos, promoting the health and well-being of the Latino LGBTQ community. His vision at Casa Latina is to create long-term social change by helping people find work while also advocating for more just policies such as anti-wage theft laws and immigration reform. Let's welcome Marcos. Last but not least, Michael Ramos, the Church Council of Greater Seattle Executive Director. He's worked on ecumenical community building for 2 decades, connecting spirituality with social justice. In the mid-1990s, he served as Director of Latino Ministries for the Catholic Diocese in Oakland. At the Church Council of Greater Seattle, he brings together and helps empower congregations throughout the region to confront homelessness, building a living wage future, and urgent immigration accompaniment and reform. He leads our community in responding to, quote, such a time as this. Mike. So I invite them all to share a little bit about their organization and then also to perhaps respond to anything they feel they want to respond to that the Attorney General said. Stella, would you like to begin?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's an honor to be here with you all this evening, and I think the introduction says a lot about El Centro de la Raza. I guess I'll talk about 2 things that we're doing concretely around the work as it relates to immigration, in particular right after our president took office in around February of 2017. El Centro de la Raza we shut down our operations basically in terms of doing the regular work for about a 9-day period and worked with families on putting their emergency safety plans together. And I think probably many of you know what that is, and that's basically if an undocumented person were to be picked up, there would be a plan of action on what would happen with the children and also the finances of families. And so we served about 300 people during that 9-day period. And then the other part of it too is that we declared ourselves a sensitive location. We wanted to declare ourselves a sanctuary organization, but in working with our attorneys, there really wasn't any teeth for us as a nonprofit. And Homeland Security has language around sensitive location. And this church is a sensitive location. It just needs, and maybe you've declared yourself, I don't know that. But we declared ourselves a sensitive location under the definition of being an educational institution. And so the categories of a sensitive location are educational institutions, churches, hospitals. ICE won't show up at rallies, weddings, funerals, that kind of thing. And so as a result of doing this work, we have been working with these different sectors, again, educational institutions, the healthcare industry, and trying to get people to understand that they are a sensitive location and declare to the community that they are that, because what you're doing is raising the consciousness of those different entities and the people that come there, so that undocumented people can feel safe. And so in some ways it's like a political statement in the community to say, we are a sensitive location, we are a welcoming place, this is a safe place for people. And I think I'll stop there because I can get long-winded.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Marcos?
So at Casa Latina, we, one of the things that happened immediately after the elections, we also mobilized and along with a number of other organizations, helped to organize what became the Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network, which now numbers more than 100 organizations across Washington state. And it's a network that came together in response to the elections and in response to the very harsh and draconian policies of this new government, some of which the Attorney General mentioned. And it's a network that came together for the purpose of really protecting and defending our immigrant community. And so we've participated with the Immigrant Solidarity Network. We've taken other steps to work with our community, because at Casa Latina, one of our programs is around employment, and we provide a great deal of services. So we actually have a large number of immigrant community that show up to our location on a daily basis. We have 50, 60, sometimes 70 people that show up at our location every single morning, Monday through Saturday. And so we became very concerned, about what could happen. And so, and we didn't feel that we were really in the kind of category of organization that could declare itself a sensitive location. But we took other steps. We took other measures. We educated ourselves about what our rights as a nonprofit organization are. For instance, if ICE were to come knocking. So we became very educated about under what circumstances we could turn ICE away. And we installed security doors, and we did a number of different things to improve our security. And we worked with our community of the community that we serve, and had many conversations. And we had drills. So we did a lot of things like that, and then also engaged with our sister organizations to work at the policy levels and with elected officials to strengthen protections in the community for our immigrant community, and also with organizations like St. Mark's to provide sanctuary should that become a necessity. So those are some of the things that we have been doing at Casa Latina since the elections, in addition to our regular work, and that's sort of in summary, and I'll stop there.
All right, thank you. Michael.
For 99 years, since 62 congregations came together in downtown Seattle at Plymouth Church, Church Council of Greater Seattle has tried to practice a faith that does justice. 15 years ago, in connection with the Church Council, this month, 15 years ago, I coordinated the conclusion of the Immigrant Workers Freedom Ride, which Casa Latina was involved, El Centro de Raza, many organizations were involved with, and there were buses from all over the country. We had a bus of 42 people from 20 different countries and 14 language groups to speak about the theme tonight, immigration reform. And that's to say the issue is very deep-seated. There are long roots, and we talked about things like due process, things like family reunification, justice on the job, and a pathway to permanency permanent residency and citizenship. And we're still engaged in that fight today. So some of the circumstances have changed, but the struggle goes deep. There are elements that have caused a great deal of fear in our community, that have divided our communities, and have caused a lot of pain and suffering within our communities, and that has been going on for decades, and that's systematic. We would call it structural sin in the religious community, but it's systematic and deep-seated, and so the faith community is called to respond with equal depth and power. And so we have set ourselves in the last year and a half for such a time as this network to seek to do what faith communities do best, to alleviate suffering, remove the fear of the people, and change unjust policies. And we're hard at work at that. And in that process, we have run into some significant realities that we've tried to be present to. And one of them, just briefly, is accompanying the parents, the mothers and fathers separated from their children coming out of CTAC. And so many of you here have been involved in that effort, and dozens of congregations have participated, accompanying these women and men traumatized, double traumatized, coming out with the prison clothes on their back. And no greater moment, first great moment, is going to Goodwill and helping them to get clothes. And those of you who've been involved in that have seen that. And the second great moment is seeing photos when they're flown back to where they're going to be reunited with their children. So we need each other, and we all need to work together. And we need to be strategic in our action and organizing, and I'm sure we'll get into that as we go forward.
Yeah. The one thing I've noticed in our immigrant communities is the increase in fear. And you mentioned, all of you mentioned in some way, shape, or form, where ICE can come, where they can't come, and those kind of things. We've been dealing with those things too. I wondered if any of you have a story you're willing to share about that to help people here understand the fear that this causes in our communities.
Well, I have two examples. One is, so earlier in 2017, maybe it's like May or June, we do a Know Your Rights training, and it's well attended. It's well attended at that time. So I think the administration has become stronger in taking positions, that people have become more fearful. And we ended up doing another Know Your Rights, and we had one person show up. And we were shocked because, we do amazing outreach so that people know what's going on. And our conclusion, obviously, is that because we were letting everybody and their brother know what we were doing, people figured ICE knew also.
Yeah, that's what we
and they were fearful and didn't show up. And so a strategy that we put in place is that we still are doing Know Your Rights trainings, but we're doing them in apartment complexes, and we're not advertising it to the world. We're just to that particular apartment complex. We're going to be here on that day. People are welcome to attend. A whole lot better attendance. So again, we're being very discreet and quiet about how we do that work so that people can receive the information. The other thing that I found very interesting is that we started citizenship classes, and about 51% of the Latino community lives in South County. So we said, we're gonna hold the classes in South County. And so we found an educational institution that was going to allow us to have the classes in Renton. We had 4 people show up. And so when we talked to people about why they didn't, well, we would rather have them at El Centro de la Raza, even though they were going to have to travel a ways to get there. And it was a question of being in a safe place. And so we have the citizenship classes now at El Centro de la Raza because people feel safe and they're well attended.
I'd like to take a slightly different
do that.
Angle on that, and that is the the toll that, that all of this is taking on our community in terms of mental health. Yes. And I mentioned before that we have done a great deal of preparation with our community in the event that there were to be an ICE raid. And I should add that we really feel that it's probably unlikely, although with this government, like, you don't know what they're capable of. Something like that has never happened at a place like Casa Latina. You know, there have been workplace raids, but we've never heard of an organization like ours being raided, but we believe that we should be prepared. And so we've done drills where we had, we had conversations with, in our worker center. So we have a worker center, it's a hiring hall, it's a large space, and there's, 50 people in the room and some of our staff. And so we would have a drill and we'd have a conversation beforehand, and we would have someone who's, a friend of our organization come in sort of, dressed up as or pretending to be an ICE agent. And we would talk about well, how should you act if an ICE agent comes in and, to try to prepare people in case something like that happens. And we actually had people tell us, you know what, you really should let me know when you're going to have this drill, because I don't think I can handle just having this sprung on me. It would be, it would just make me too anxious. I couldn't deal with that. We had people tell us that. And so we're very aware of just the level of anxiety. And so part of the work that we've been doing actually has been to seek out mental health resources in the community and make sure that that we're making those available to our community, to our clients, and the people that we serve. And that's a real need that exists, because as resilient as our community is, and people are resilient because they have to be to survive, at the same time, this very much takes a toll on people. And so we really have to recognize that. And, there's different ways that we respond to that. We do make people aware of resources that exist. And then we also do other things, like we have, community celebrations. And those are ways that we have, events that are celebratory, that are healing, and that help us, that provide us the opportunity for people to come together and have that community space. And we create community space, and that's very healing and very helpful as well. But that's another way that that all of this is sort of having an effect and taking a toll.
Mm-hmm. Great.
So the context for the conversation is the attempted criminalization of all immigrants who are not permanent residents or naturalized citizens. So in that context, the fear is very much generalized. Efforts have been underway, instead of workplace raids that have occurred in the past at great numbers. It's been a trickle, bit by bit, drip by drip by drip. The administration has been putting into place all their goals that they set out in a small memo that they set out about the same time as the travel ban. So the concept of, if you get public benefits, we're not going to allow you to become a permanent resident. Or the concept of taking away temporary protected status. Or that we're going to incarcerate families. Or that we're going to put other people subject to deportation, including ending DACA. All these things have been bit by bit putting in place. So the fear is generalized within the community. The greatest fear for many of the people is the fear of deportation. So in going back to some of the countries, I can speak particularly to the Central American countries, going back full circle to the 1980s, deportation may mean death. So this is not something to overthink. It's that people have a great deal of fear, and related to that fear is this tragic separation of families. This is why my good friend Jose, who took sanctuary at Gethsemane Lutheran Church, who I visited this afternoon, his greatest fear is being separated from his families and deported to Mexico. He represents tens of thousands of people in the same situation. The concept of family separation is not new. It's just been put forth in an ever more cruel and, we would say, evil way. And so we try to confront that through our actions, through our accompaniment, and giving clear message of love and support as we can.
Thank you. Thank you all. So we talked about fear. What about resilience? Where are you seeing resilience, and how are people adapting? What are maybe stories you can share about that?
So one of the things that we do, one of the sort of programs or activities that we have at Casa Latina is a women's leadership group. And that's a space where women participate to develop their leadership. And it's a space of solidarity, and it is a space of resilience. And I think that that's one of the ways that that we cultivate resilience, and that is a wonderful opportunity for people to come together and to develop their leadership and to have a place to express their sense of community. I think in general, you know, this is something that's organic in the community. At Casa Latina, I mentioned we have a, you know, we're among other things, we're a worker center, and we're a place where people come together every morning to look for work. And the space where people come together is a place where people are having a cup of coffee while they're waiting to find out if they're going to work that day, and people are, you know, maybe reading a newspaper, and people are sort of hanging out, and there is that sense of community. And so, you know, one thing I want to say is that when people talk about, and especially in the context of what we do, people talk about Latinos as being hard workers. And while I appreciate that, I also, you know, there's something about that that I don't appreciate, because what I don't appreciate about it is people's identity being sort of wrapped up in what they have to offer as labor, because people are a whole person. You know, they're also somebody's neighbor, they're somebody's mom, they're somebody's, you know, friend, and they're a whole person. And I think the resilience in the community is in that, is that they are a community. You know, they're friends and neighbors who help each other, who look out for each other, and who form community together, who form community bonds. And I think, you know, in what I see in my work at Casa Latina, that's where the community resilience comes in people's sort of organic ability and tendency to form community bonds and to look out for each other and to offer each other a helping hand. One of the things that people at Casa Latina have done, the workers there, since most of them don't have access to the social safety nets, they have created what's called a fondo de emergencia. So it's kind of like a mutual aid mechanism where workers contribute a few dollars a week to a fund. And then if somebody gets hurt, if they get injured on a job, then they can draw from that. They can draw a few $100s to sort of help them through when they're not able to work. So, and that's something that they came up with, and they manage it. The workers themselves keep track of it. When somebody needs to draw money from that, they sort of take care of that whole thing. And so to me, that's a wonderful example of community resilience and creativity, and a way that the community takes care of itself.
Thank you.
Well, I echo everything that Marcos said, and he was very eloquent and stated it well. I mean, our community, they're living their lives. They haven't stopped living. I mean, I think about the different activities where we see large amounts of people. Like, for instance, we have started a business opportunity center, and so we're working with people on establishing a small business, growing their business, are competing for state grants or state contracts. And I want to give an example. We are working with a group of women in Mukilteo, and there's about 50 women who want to start a business, and they've started some semblance and they want to grow it more. And how resilient is that in this time and day that they're organized in that way? And again, just as we live our lives every day, they are also. Yesterday, we had a meeting with the superintendent of the Seattle School District. A large amount of Latina women who were there wanting to talk to the superintendent about issues within the school district. And we said, you are in a safe environment, know that, and you are in a safe environment to express your opinion to the superintendent also, which was really great. So I'll just leave it at that people are living and that they're living and they keep their life moving.
Excellent, thank you.
So from the faith community standpoint, we decided we need to get organized. And so in the organization, we've touched over 130 congregations across all religious lines, and we're prepared to accompany people to hearings, to appointments, to provide short and long-term housing or hospitality, to offer sanctuary where called upon or needed. And so we don't have to look very far. People are being housed, people are being supported, people are being accompanied, and we're offering solidarity as need be the case. The resilience in the people is quite evident. At the same time, people who've been traumatized and re-traumatized, the support and the walking together in the face of everything that people are facing is pretty significant. The faith communities don't organize apart from everyone else. We're a firm part of the Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network. So my colleagues here, we've been working together for years and with many organizations. So we're not siloed as faith community here and the rest of the community here, but we're one community. And we build those bridges over the course of time. So what happens to Casa Latina, if something happens there, we know St. Mark's will be there. Right, St. Mark's? So that's the accompaniment. And then you find in the course that it is in direct encounter with impacted people that's transformative, mutually transformative, and really begins to change the narrative. Because faith communities, we're about changing the story from one of hate and violence to one of love and compassion. That's what we're about. And I'm relentless in saying this. That's what we do. And we will do it, and eventually we will win. And so just a little story. A woman showed up at an African-American church several years ago, and my friends called me and said, can we work on housing together? So we said, person came, spoke very little English, separated from the rest of her family, came from Haiti. And she didn't know where to go. We worked together on housing. She, on her own, worked on, English, getting a job, speaks 3 languages now. And I saw her at a memorial last week and said, I'm established. My husband was able to come from Haiti. I'm able to be together as a family, and we are settled, and I have a good job, and here I go. We don't guarantee that that's going to happen, but we need to be present when it does, because it happens more often than we think. And so it's just a commitment to be present, to be there, and congregations need to be able to expand the view and sometimes go beyond the comfort zones and boundaries that we're accustomed to.
Thank you. So, panelists, we're going to bring the evening to a close, but we're going to do one more thing. That is, I'm going to leave you with the question I left with the Attorney General. What should folks go out of here and do? What do they do when they walk out those doors? And also give you an opportunity. What's the one thing that didn't get addressed tonight? There may be many, but one that you would want to say, if that is such. Something I wasn't wise enough to ask you that you would wish somebody had. So I give you the opportunity to do that, and then also address that question. What would you ask people that are here tonight that are concerned about this to go out and do? Not just to be here in solidarity, but to act.
Well, I can start. We have 20 days till the midterm elections. And if we have different people who are in the House, if we have different people who are in the Senate, we may end up being able to have immigration reform if we turn that around. And so we need to make those kind of connections. And, you know, I've heard, you know, different people say that this probably is the most important election in each of our lifetimes, how old we are. And so it's extremely important. And you hear people to say, you should vote, and you should vote. But what we need you to be in these next 20 days is to be community organizers. And that means in the congregation, talking about how are we going to get others to go out and vote. Talking to your family, your neighbors, your co-workers. That's the kind of energy that we need now. And I've been saying that in this day and time, the mere act of voting is a revolutionary act. That's how important it is.
Amen. Thank you.
So on October the 27th, and I have some of these little things back on the table there where the programs are at, we're having a Bring Your Ballot party. And that is for individuals who may not, you know, you look at the ballot. I remember the first time that I saw the ballot, way back when we started, there were mail-ins, I put it down because it was like, oh my God, this seems so daunting. People who may be first-time voters, maybe the ballot is in their own language, but it's still confusing. And so that Bring Your Ballot party is to help those people answer the questions. And so it's a full day from 10 to 7 p.m. There's going to be different music, there's going to be food, and we also need volunteers. And we're not just targeting Latinos. It is for people from all you know, racial backgrounds, and we'll have the appropriate interpreters there. And so I guess that's my takeaway.
Excellent.
For this and how it relates to immigration. So,
thank you.
I agree. And I would add that, you know, voting is important. It's absolutely crucial. And then after the election, I think it's really important to remain engaged, to stay engaged, to follow up with the winners of the elections, and to stay engaged with the issues that you care about. Follow up with your elected representatives and find out if they are following up with you on the issues that you care about. You know, I would note also that right now, at this moment, the city of Seattle is right in the middle of its budget cycle. The mayor has released her proposed budget. The city council is considering that budget from the mayor and deciding what changes, if any, they are going to make. Our city continues to be in a crisis around homelessness issues, and so this is a really important issue that deserves our attention. And I would urge you to engage with your city elected officials around city budget issues. And so, because I think that, you know, too often I think voting is crucial, but I think it's really important to be engaged continuously, and particularly around, well, certainly around immigration issues, but around other issues that are critical as well.
Thank you.
So we each have a voice. We must use our voice. There's always a menu of options for action. The issue, especially for people of faith, is not to overthink it, and we have to ultimately get to some action. Our members of Congress in this area are leading the movement toward positive change on immigration policy. So we don't have to look very far. H.R. 3923, and you can talk with Glenn from Congressman Smith's officers here. Congressman Smith and Congressman Jayapal have a great bill, the Dignity for Detained Immigrants Act, which would transform the private prison system and ultimately eliminate it. And I think we have to think proactively when 40,000 people are detained on any particular night. The second area is this travesty to create more categories for which a person could be deemed for a public charge. In other words, that they are dependent on government. We have sheets in the back that describe how you can write letters, and the whole public is asked to comment in this brief window of time.
Which is right now.
Which is right now. So we ask everyone to write letters on that front. And the third thing, as I see, I think it's Greg back there, the refugees, is the cutting of numbers of refugees admitted to this country. See, the whole the policy is set around trying to make it so miserable for the greatest number of people that people will want to leave the country or to close the doors. And we must counter that narrative with our own actions of love. So the policy front is very important, and I'll just leave you with this. In the 1980s, led by University Baptist Church, there was a lawsuit, American Baptist Churches, against the administration at the time when 98 to 99% of Central Americans were denied asylum in the United States of America. And that lawsuit was based on the actions of ministers and other leaders who were part of the sanctuary movement at that time. And that ended up with hundreds of thousands of asylum cases being reopened. It led to other measures that went into effect, like temporary protected status and a policy called NACARA that provided stoppage of deportation and opened the door for many, many people to live here on a long-term basis. And so small actions can lead to big things. And so we have the ingenuity amongst us all, and so the idea is to work across the usual lines that we create, and you'll be surprised to see what we can achieve together.
Let's thank our panelists for being here tonight. We thank you for being here and also for the ministry that you do every day and for the work that you do. I cannot leave tonight without encouraging you to give to these organizations. And also, in the Diocese of Olympia, we have a legal defense fund. And people have been very generous with that, but it's depleted as fast as it's filled. And I will just say, to add to some of what you have said tonight, that the action and the requests on that fund have picked up considerably in the last several weeks for asylum cases and different things. So there's a lot you can do with your resources to help as well. Thank you again. I invite you all to stand. I'm going to offer a prayer for any of those who would like to join me in that. The Lord be with you. God of the journey, God of the traveler, we pray for those who leave their homes in search of new beginnings and possibilities. May they know your presence with them. We pray that those who seek to make a home in this country may find us welcoming and willing to help them find a path toward citizenship. We We pray that our legislators, as they craft new immigration legislation, may find the wisdom and courage to enact new policies that do justice for our country and for those who would immigrate here. We pray that for those who fan the flames of fear and discrimination against the undocumented, that they may be touched with your divine compassion. We pray in thanksgiving for the God of love. Amen. Thank you all for being here tonight, and let's thank our panelists one more time.